Hello and welcome to the DOL Pod. I'm your host, Alejandro Otero. Today, we're featuring a conversation on the ethics of AI in Black historical research. Whose story is the AI telling? First, I would like to introduce our guest, Dr. Lucretia Williams. Dr. Williams, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Dr. Lucretia Williams. I'm currently a senior research scientist within Howard University's Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Institute. I'm also a Howard alum. So now I'm back. I'm doing the work that I love. So my research sits at the intersection of human-computer interaction, responsible AI, as well as health research.
To get started, I think a big topic that folks are aware of but may not have delved into is the issue of bias in the machine, such as facial recognition software not being able to recognize faces of color. How does this manifest specifically when we start looking at Black historical research and AI being used in new and unique ways to drive further in that space?
Yeah, so the way AI works is it has to have a lot of data to learn from. So it's like AI is your helper, and as you show it articles, pictures, sounds, and as we talk about historical research documents or articles, this is how AI system can learn and produce whatever outputs that you train it to do. So in the context of Black historical research, our archives and Black stories aren't digitized, saved, or even trained on AI systems. This is where you have bias comes up. You can only train what you have or train what you give the AI systems. And I know, like in currently in the state of this country, we are having banned books and certain classes, such as African American history classes, being taken out of certain curriculums in certain states across the United States. We are battling also systemic issues, but then those same systemic issues are replicated within the technology. So, in the context of Black historical research, we just need everyone to come together to kind of make sure that we have our stories being told in non-traditional tech forms as well as AI platforms currently.
So, the model's output is a reflection of what the training data is. So, if we have data that reflects a dominant cultural narrative, we're leaving blind spots there. Is there, in the work that you've done, in your experience, are there any ways that we can combat this to avoid a furtherance of that historical erasure?
Yeah, and I think this is where collaboration and partnership really comes in because we have initiatives. So, for example, I know there's an initiative here at Howard University where we have the Moreland Springard Center, where that's one of the largest Black archives, in the world, right? So there are also talks happening on how are we going to digitize all of that great things that sit in Founders Library, right? And make sure that we are able to use all of that wealth of knowledge. And now that Howard also has the partnership with OpenAI, like what is the best way of how we can integrate the two, but ethically and responsibly as well? Because we know, we don't own a lot of these servers, a lot of the models that these companies have, and we want to make sure that our narratives are being told contextually in the way that is also nuanced and accurate. Sometimes we also would need to be careful of having certain historical narratives being pushed that doesn't show the full context in the picture. Because as you can tell, if you watch documentaries or just news articles or things on the news, you can see who is telling the story, right? Is it being told in the way that it actually happened? So I think this is where partnerships come with Black archivists, Black historical leaders, as well as people on the tech side who can be able to advocate, hey, here how we can possibly create the data set and show the nuances when we upload the data into the system to train the large language models. Like maybe we want to make sure we are carefully presented the data in a way where it shows the full narrative. But it's also not an easy thing to do. It's also not cheap, right? So we also need to make sure when partnerships are created in the sense of true partnership and not exploitative as well, as like, hey, like maybe, for example, Howard University, we can fully own the everything that we create, like the proceeds and anything that is launched on top of our systems go back to us so we can continue to fund these initiatives. But if we start to kind of not think that way, we won't have a lot of funding to keep these things going on in the future sense.
On that note, what are some of the other key areas where you think that AI could be really beneficial in this field? And how can we keep using those tools responsibly?
Yeah, I think AI could be really beneficial in his history education. So we also know we are going through a bit of a literacy crisis, but we also want to be careful in making sure we are not dumping AI tools into the classroom blindly and without making sure it is actually being used to further the education of students and it's not adding on extra labor for the teachers or just even putting in some type of confusion and dysfunction in classrooms, right? There are certain tools that AI researchers have decided to kind of use large language models, VR, virtual reality on top of large language models, as well as doing game-based design and et cetera. But I think all these ideas sound good in theory, but in certain school districts and certain schools, it's not as easy to implement as people think the idea is, right? So it's a great
Mm.
idea, but this is where kind of the digital divide comes in, where there are certain communities that have a lot of access to the latest and greatest education tech tools. There are communities we can't even afford that. We can't even train our teachers to even introduce that into the classroom. And like, what time do we have to even do all of this, right? But I do think there is an opportunity to still start introducing a lot of these AI concepts into K through 12 education. And it can start with certain curriculums, right? But I think it's the way we do it. We have to be mindful of the environmental context as well as where the students are currently within their curriculum and their schooling as well.
So why is this human-centric oversight so essential and for challenging that bias that we see?
Yeah, so being that I work in human computer interaction and human centered AI, we always have to have the human in the loop. Like technology cannot thrive, it cannot advance without humans being at the forefront of designing, iterating on top of, or even coming up with new ideas because technology isn't neutral. It will never be neutral. The people who are creating it and the hands on training it, though it's a reflection of our society and the people who are creating these technologies, right? So when it comes to Black History GPT, we want to make sure it's accurate, and the more human raters or the more human evaluators that you have on a tool like that, the less bias you will be able to pick up. Now, not trying to say there won't be, it will be complete rid of bias because it is still humans evaluating and training it. So I think with any technology system, there always has to have humans in the loop because it would never thrive without it. And this is where you hear there's bias tools and things of that nature where you only think about the technology in its benefits and its tech capabilities. But sometimes you have to decentralize the great things that the technology can do and really try to put certain contexts in real world implementation into for these tech tools of like how can this be used like your example be used in K through 12 or how can it also be used in higher education, right? So I think if you start to do those types of contextualizations, a lot of interesting results would come up for both populations, right? So I think doing that deep explorative research when it comes to technology, also testing and seeing what the outcomes are once you deploy it, and also making sure it doesn't stop there. You bring the humans back, ask them their perceptions, their experiences, maybe even co-design with some of your using your population of these tools, and you will have a lot of rich insights and always keep the human in the center of technology, innovation, and design.
We touched very briefly on the thoughts around equity and around making sure that everyone has access to these tools. I'm thinking about just data that's coming through. And in this context, maybe how can researchers ensure that their AI tools are being used to mitigate harm rather than repeat some of these harmful stories that have shaped the world we live in?
I love that question. And I think this is where like my community-based researcher hat comes in a little bit, right? So I kind of want to answer this question based on a project I've done in the past. So we were creating a WhatsApp chatbot for social and emotional development assessments for low-income children in South Africa. So instead of saying like, hey, we want to create this chatbot, we think it's important because they kind of need this tool, we wanted to make sure we went into the communities and asked their perceptions and their understanding about how this tool would fit in their everyday work duties, right? So we went into 4 townships, two rural, two urban, because the settings will be vastly different on whether or not this chatbot will be able to be usable. So we use a nonprofit organization that had a home visiting based program. And we spoke to the home visitors just about their perceptions, if they use technology, which they had work phones that their nonprofit presented them so they could get in contact with the families and etc. But one thing that came out of it is the socioeconomic challenges within those low income communities and about how this tool would either exacerbate the further injustices and systemic inequalities within the community versus how beneficial this will be on my work duties, right? And largely the systemic inequities that they face were in the rural communities, a lot of the parents and the caregivers wouldn't have phones. So the home visitor would have to get in contact with that one person in the neighborhood who had a phone that could then reach the other caregivers to say, hey, she's coming to sit with your child and things of that nature, right? So we wanted to make sure, okay, so how would that affect the assessments? If the home visitor is doing a lot on their phone already and may not be able to get in contact once they reach the community, would the assessments be done already within WhatsApp, or what would be the outcome of it, right? In the urban communities, everyone like kind of had more phones. It still was a divide in that. It was more so like data use issues was common. They have to pay for data. So if your data is up for the month, there's no more assessments on the phone. So when it comes to making sure that we are creating just technologies, it's really going into the community and doing that deep dive and going back, always going back to context to see if this will be able to be implemented in a real world setting, right? And I think also what we did is we kind of did a little bit of co-design with them to see, okay, how would you envision this assessment to look like? What kind of features? What's the cadence in which you think is allowable and doable within your work duties to do these assessments, right? And what training would you need? So all those things, it seems it started off with just an AI chatbot, to help, right? But there's these other real world context that affects the technology that we need to pay just as much attention to than the technology itself. Because the technology would never work and no one will use it. It will be like all those other apps that's people delete from their phone that's sitting in the app store. No one ever uses it. We really have to make sure if we are wanting to use technology to further advance certain societies, close the digital divide, making sure that we are allowing, in their sense, home visitors to have a sense of autonomy and sense of agency with using a WhatsApp tool. We have to make sure we are getting some type of data from users themselves and see, and as researchers, in coming together and co-designing with them and seeing which ways we can actually implement their insights based on our AI and our technology expertise. And I always say with making sure our technology isn't biased, it's more just, we have to collaborate interdisciplinarily. AI researchers cannot do it alone because sometimes you only an expert in one field. You're only going to see what you see. We cannot do this work siloed, sitting at our desk, tinkering and seeing what works, because it will further like introduce a problem of unbiased and unjust technology systems where you're not actually going out getting the experiences in the real world lived experiences of those people who are going to be either harmed or benefit from these AI technologies.
What do our users have to think about? What questions do they have to ask when an AI tool surfaces an historical finding about the Black experience?
Yeah, so I think the number one is like asking where the source comes from because that will give you kind of a hint on where's the story being told from and from through who and from what lens. Also, as well as once you find where the source is, kind of like trying to understand a little bit about what is the background of it, the key players, the key cities, and just to contextualize a little bit more about that output and that answer that LLM or that ChatGPT have given you. Because I think when it comes to historical education, the source is the top thing you kind of want to identify and kind of reflect upon because everyone telling a historical account will always be from a different lens depending on who is telling it, right?
Excellent. So it goes down to not only once you receive your output, considering the source, considering the author and what intent they may have had behind their writing, it goes into your prompts and how you are asking these questions that may shift the algorithm because it just wants to make you happy. It just wants to give you an answer. And it's going to try and find that best response for you. So being mindful of how you enter those prompts to get those questions answered is key as well. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. It was great to have you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you to our listeners. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next time on the DOL Pod.